I had no idea my life would change like this, but everything started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee in the kitchen. Carol, my stepmother, called to inform me that my dad had passed away. The funeral was 4 days later, and I found myself standing in front of my father's grave, looking around, feeling like an outsider in my own family. But nothing was as shocking as what I would discover just weeks after that. When I returned to London after the funeral, I got a call from Mr. Harrison, my dad's lawyer of 30 years. He asked me if I had received a copy of my dad's will. I told him no. He asked if I had been involved in the probate process, and I said no. Honestly, I believed Carol when she told me that my dad had left everything to her because I was living abroad and didn't need anything. But when I received the will from Mr. Harrison, I could barely breathe. Everything Carol had told me was a lie. The Maple Street house, the house my dad had always been so proud of, was supposed to be mine. Carol had deceived me, and that was when I decided I had to do something about it. My name is Nathan. I'm 31 years old, and I work in software development in London. My dad, Henry, was a great father who raised me alone after my mom died in a car accident when I was 4. He worked as a contractor and built a small but stable business. After my mom passed, I lived with him until I was 8, when he met Carol at a community barbecue. Carol had a son, Morgan, 26, from her first marriage. Although Carol never really treated me like a mother, she did the basic things like packing my lunches and signing permission slips, but there was always this distance. When I turned 12, we moved into a larger house on Maple Street. Dad worked extra hard to buy that house. He had to take on extra contracts and work weekends, but after 15 years, he had paid it off. He was incredibly proud of that house. We had this tradition on every Sunday morning where he and I would sit in the kitchen and he'd talk about his plans for retirement and how the house would be mine one day when I started my own family. I believed him. When I moved to London at 25 for work, Dad supported my decision even though it meant I would only visit twice a year. Carol made comments about me abandoning the family, but Dad shut those down. Morgan stayed local, working in sales at a car dealership. He got engaged to his girlfriend, Chelsea, 25, about 6 months before Dad got sick. When Dad was diagnosed, I took an emergency leave and flew back to care for him. He had maybe 4 to 6 months left, but I stayed for the last 9 weeks of his life, working remotely when I could. There were small signs, tiny hints that I should have seen, that things were not as they seemed. Carol was always in charge, handling everything, medications, visitors, bills, while I sat by Dad's side, trying to be there for him as best I could. But the more I watched, the more uneasy I became. It wasn't just the way Carol took charge so smoothly, it was the way she kept me at arm's length. There were moments when she'd suggest things, decisions about the house or the business, and I felt pushed aside as if my opinion no longer mattered. It was as though she had already taken control. Morgan wasn't much help either. At first, he seemed like an ally, but as the days went by, I could see his impatience growing. He was already making plans for his own life, getting engaged, planning his wedding, and there was an underlying tension whenever we talked about the house or Dad's health. I could tell Morgan was eager to get everything settled, but it felt like he was pushing for things that didn't sit right with me. Carol always seemed calm, but I started noticing the little things, the way she'd make comments about how the house was too big for her now, about how she wanted to move on after Dad's passing. I ignored it at first, telling myself it was just her trying to cope with the loss, but deep down I felt like there was more to it. One evening, after Dad had fallen asleep, she asked me about the future of the Maple Street house. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I should have. It was as if she was already planning for what would come after his death, and I had a feeling that whatever she had in mind, I wasn't going to like it. It wasn't until after the funeral that I truly realized how deep the deception ran. Carol called me to sit down with her and Morgan. She explained, with what I can only describe as a calm detachment, that Dad had left everything to her. The house, the business, the savings, everything was now in her name. I sat there, stunned, trying to process her words. This didn't match what Dad had told me. This wasn't what he had promised me in his final days. She showed me papers, official-looking documents with stamps and signatures, but I couldn't focus on them. I kept thinking about the conversations I'd had with Dad, how he'd told me the house would be mine, how he'd reassured me that everything was arranged. Morgan nodded along, agreeing with Carol, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Carol's calm explanation didn't make sense. She kept talking about how Dad had wanted her to have everything to ensure her security in retirement, but that wasn't what he'd said to me. He had promised me the house, and now it was all gone. I wanted to shout, to argue, but I felt frozen. The grief from losing my dad was still raw, and now I was faced with this betrayal, this blatant lie. I spent the next few days trying to digest everything. I packed up Dad's personal belongings, thinking this would be the last time I would ever see the house. Carol had made it clear that everything was hers now, and I had no right to question it, or so I thought. I returned to London, but my mind kept returning to that day in the living room with Carol and Morgan. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something, that I had been played for a fool. For weeks, I wrestled with the decision to take legal action. The house was mine. I had to believe that. But how could I challenge Carol after everything she'd done for Dad in his final months? I felt conflicted. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I should just let it go. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. I spent hours thinking about Dad's final days. His words in that bedroom when he had squeezed my hand and told me everything was taken care of. I tried to rationalize what had happened, but it didn't make sense. Carol had manipulated the situation. She had taken advantage of my grief, hiding the will, and I had let her. It wasn't just about the house. It was about my relationship with Dad, about the trust we had built over the years. I confronted myself, asking what I had missed. Why hadn't I questioned Carol sooner? Why had I let her take control? The guilt I felt for not seeing through her lies was suffocating. I couldn't let it go. I decided to confront Carol. I made the phone call, my heart racing as I dialed her number. I needed answers, even if they were hard to hear. The days after my call with Carol were a blur. I returned to Olympia, determined to confront her about the will. As I pulled up to the Maple Street house, the familiar sight of it sent a wave of nostalgia rushing through me. The house felt like a different lifetime now, but I couldn't let it go. I had every right to claim what my dad had promised me. Carol greeted me at the door, her face neutral, as if she expected me. We sat in the living room, and I placed the papers from Mr. Harrison in front of her. She froze, staring at the documents with wide eyes, but quickly recovered. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Nathan," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, "but you're making a huge mistake." I stayed calm, pointing to the signatures, explaining how the will had been hidden and how it was legally binding. Carol's facade cracked. She started pacing, her anger rising, and she began shouting that I was lying, that I was trying to destroy the family. Her words felt like knives, but I couldn't back down. She accused me of being selfish, of coming back after abandoning Dad for so many years, of thinking I was entitled to everything because I was the only child. But I wasn't there to listen to her blame game. I was there to take back what was rightfully mine. "I'm not the one who's lying here, Carol," I said firmly. "You're the one who hid Dad's will. You're the one who betrayed him." Morgan arrived midway through the confrontation. His face immediately fell when he saw the papers on the table. He stood there, looking from Carol to me, clearly torn. But soon his frustration turned into anger. He turned to me, accusing me of destroying everything. "You left him when he needed you the most," Morgan spat, his voice trembling with emotion. "You can't just waltz back in and take everything." I felt my throat tighten. "You don't know what I've been through, Morgan. You have no idea what it was like to watch him die." But Morgan wasn't listening. He was caught up in his own version of events, in the narrative Carol had fed him. He didn't understand what I was fighting for, and honestly, I didn't think he ever would. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal paperwork and emotional turmoil. Carol and Morgan's refusal to accept the truth about the will made everything harder. Every time I spoke to Carol, she would twist the facts, painting me as the villain. She accused me of trying to steal from her, of ruining Morgan's life, and the worst part? She managed to make me doubt myself. Maybe I was being too aggressive. Maybe I was being unreasonable. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake at night, replaying every conversation, every moment of the past few weeks. The weight of the decision I had made to challenge Carol started to feel heavier, and I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. I had the house, the legal right to it, but was it worth it? Was my relationship with Carol, with Morgan, worth the cost? I started doubting myself. Maybe Dad had made a mistake. Maybe Carol was right. Maybe she did deserve the house after all. She had been there for Dad in his final months. She had taken care of him, and in some way that counted for something. But then I remembered the words he had said to me on his deathbed. "The house is yours. I made sure of it." I couldn't let that go. But the guilt of destroying what little was left of my family, of pushing Carol and Morgan away, began to consume me. I felt alone, disconnected from everything I had known. The pain of betrayal was one thing, but the pain of losing my family was another. I reached a breaking point. I realized that I couldn't let Carol manipulate the situation any longer. I had to do what was right, not just for the house, but for my own peace of mind. I couldn't live my life under her thumb, carrying the weight of her lies. I took the step to speak to a neutral third party, a lawyer who specialized in probate disputes. I needed someone to explain to me what my options were, to guide me through the legal process of claiming my inheritance. The lawyer confirmed what I already knew. I was entitled to the house. It was rightfully mine, and there was no legal reason why I couldn't evict Carol and Morgan from it. But as I looked at the documents, as I made my plans to return to Olympia and reclaim my property, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting for myself, for the person I had become, the person my father had raised me to be. I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. I called Carol, my voice steady this time. "I'm coming to the house, Carol," I said. "And this time, I'm not leaving without what's mine." The day I returned to Olympia with the lawyer in tow was the day everything changed. Carol and Morgan were caught off guard, blindsided by the legal notice I presented. It was official, legally binding, and there was no turning back. Carol's face drained of color as she read the eviction notice. She didn't scream, didn't shout. She just stood there, stunned, the weight of the situation sinking in. Morgan, on the other hand, didn't take it so calmly. He accused me of destroying everything, of taking away the one thing that had made Carol happy. But what he didn't understand, what neither of them understood, was that I was merely claiming what had been promised to me, what had been rightfully mine all along. The next month was chaotic. Carol's lawyer tried to argue that the will was invalid or that I had waited too long to claim the inheritance. But the law was clear. I had the documents, I had the proof, and I wasn't going to back down. The judge ruled in my favor, and Carol had no choice but to pack up and leave the house. It felt surreal, but as I watched her load her things into the moving truck, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Morgan moved out with Chelsea, and I was left alone in the house that once held so many memories. The house was finally mine. But as I sat there, looking around at the empty rooms, I realized something. I had won the legal battle, but at what cost? In the weeks that followed, I took the time to heal. I processed everything, what had happened with Carol, with Morgan, and with the house. I realized that no matter how much money or property I had inherited, it couldn't replace the family I had lost. But through it all, I learned something important. I learned to trust myself, to stand up for what was mine, and to recognize that sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy. It's not about revenge or getting back at people. It's about protecting yourself, your future, and your own peace of mind. The Maple Street house was sold, and with the money from the estate, I started to rebuild my life. I invested, paid off my student loans, and began planning my future. But every time I think about that house, I remember Sunday mornings with my dad, and I realize that the memories are what matter most.